everyone, and thank you for joining us for our educator training on the topic of microplastics. My name is Laurel Zaima Sheehy, and I'm the program manager of the K-12 and continuing education programs at the Columbia Climate School. I just wanted to do a quick introduction for the Climate School in case you are unfamiliar. So the Climate School's mission is to develop and inspire knowledge-based solutions and educate futures for just and prosperous societies on a healthy planet. This is the first new school at Columbia University in 25 years. And the school is set up in a way that allows us to better connect, amplify, and advance new areas of climate inquiry, research, and impact across Columbia and beyond. And the school has a mission and commitment to educational opportunities that provide interdisciplinary knowledge for climate leaders, and that includes students, teachers, and the public across a diversity of interests and backgrounds. And today's topic is entitled Microplastics Mega Impact. We're going to be sharing some background about microplastics. We have another speaker joining us, Dr. Bejan, who is going to be telling us about his microplastic and nanoplastic research at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory of Columbia University's Climate School. And then I will share some activities and lessons that you can bring into your classroom to share this topic with your students, focusing on grades 3 through 8. Okay, so if you ever have looked up at the Milky Way galaxy and just wondered how many stars are up there, it is about 400 billion stars. And if you're like me and you wonder, okay, how much plastic is in our oceans? It is about 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic, which is about 13 times more plastic in the ocean than stars in our galaxy. Now, this was calculated from a study done in 2014, and it only looked at the surface of the ocean. So this is even a huge underestimate of what we think the plastic content is, unfortunately, in our waterways. And in addition, there's approximately 12.7 million metric tons of plastic waste that's being dumped into our oceans each year. So how did we get to this problem? Well, plastic is human-made, and it was first created back in the 1800s by a man named Alexander Parks. This plastic technology was primarily dormant during the time of its inception until World War II. And that's when they started using it in piping, around wires, and in war machinery. And the plastic technology started to take off from there once we started to realize the capabilities of plastic, that it's extremely moldable, that it could be made into a variety of different objects. However, after the war, the oil industries, given that plastic is created from oil, the oil industries needed to push this plastic industry into new sectors because they wanted to stay profitable even after the war. And so one thing that they really pushed for was this single-use disposable product. That really, during this time period of the 50s, really glorified this throwaway living lifestyle, how easy it is to use something and throw it away without having to worry about washing dishes at the end of a long day. So this really glorified single-use plastics, but this ended up being a huge design flaw given the material that plastic is made out of. We're going to touch on that in just a moment. But you can just see in this graph, looking at plastic production on the y-axis and dates across the x-axis starting in 1950 to into the future of 2030, you can see we have exponentially grown in our production of plastics throughout time. In fact, since 2000, the world has produced as much plastic as all the preceding years combined, which just shows that we're definitely growing and accelerating our production of plastic, and that's due to the demand. Now, plastic can be made out of a variety of different polymers, but all plastics are made from a wide range of these synthetic or semi-synthetic organic compounds. And these plastic chemical compounds are derived from petrochemicals or oil. So there are a variety of different plastic polymers, but the most common are probably some names that you may be familiar with that you use in your everyday lives. So the most popular by far is polyethylene. This type of polymer is used to create plastic bags, storage containers. Next would be polypropylene, bottle caps, ropes, gears, strapping equipment, all is created from polypropylene. Polystyrene, also known as styrofoam, creates takeout containers and utensils. We have polyamide, which is nylon. Rope, fishing gear can be made out of nylon. And then polyester, which is used to create textiles. So these are some of the most common forms of plastic polymers. And you can see on the graph on the right, it just shows that the most created plastic polymers are also the ones that are the most commonly found in microplastic debris in the marine environment. So these plastic polymers, yes, have made our lives so convenient, and we use them all the time. If you look around you, you probably see a variety of plastic products right in front of you. I certainly do. But the problem with plastic is when we're using them as single-use products, they do not biodegrade. So generally, all plastic ever created still exists. Now, this is due to the chemical structure of plastics. Because they are made of these very strong carbon-carbon bonds, it makes it nearly impossible to biodegrade in nature. If you think about decomposers and bacteria, they've learned how to decompose organic material over millions of years. But since plastic is relatively new, they're still learning how to adapt and how to degrade such a unique compound like the plastic polymers that we use today. However, this is to say that we are finding new things all the time. There was just a study that came out that was really publicized a couple months ago that found that waxworms have an enzyme that is able to break down polyethylene. So it's not to say that it's entirely impossible, but with so many organisms on Earth not being able to decompose or to adapt to the plastic that is really ubiquitous on our Earth, we can't look at just a handful of these new adaptations from, let's say, waxworms as a global solution. The challenge is scale there, that we just have so much plastic in our environment, not enough organisms know how to decompose it. So that leads to a challenge of microplastics. Instead of biodegrading in the environment, these macro or larger plastics, they break up into tinier and tinier pieces of plastic that further litter our world. So microplastics are defined as anywhere between 1 micron to 5 millimeters. And this is a general definition. 1 micron is roughly the size of our red blood cells, and 5 millimeters is roughly the size of a pencil. So you can see this is a huge size range that we're looking at in terms of plastics. They have found that plastics can be broken up into even smaller pieces of nanoplastics that are defined as anywhere between 1 micron and 1 nanometer. So very, very, very tiny scale. And the impacts of these nanoplastics are currently being studied and still quite unknown because more research needs to be done on them. So these microplastics can be further broken down into 2 categories: primary and secondary plastics. So primary plastics, microplastics, are manufactured to be small in size. So they are manufactured small to then create a certain or to serve a certain purpose. For example, microbeads have been used as an exfoliant. Secondary microplastics, on the other hand, they are formed from the degradation of macro or larger plastics. And this can happen through physical fragmentation, such as if you have plastics that are in the ocean, waves crashing and breaking them up against, the shoreline or rocks. You can have this degradation through oxidation. Bacteria can break them up or make these macroplastics more brittle into smaller pieces of plastic. Photo degradation from essentially the sun's UV rays. They're very powerful and can break up these plastics. And then there's also heat. So the heating of plastic can break them up as well. So secondary plastics, when they are these microplastics, when they're very small, it's oftentimes hard to tell the exact source, but if you can, we categorize them in 3 categories as fragments, films, and foam. So first are primary microplastics, these microbeads. These small beads were created to increase the friction or exfoliation in washing or cleaning. So oftentimes, historically, you can think of these as being found in our face wash, our body wash, even our toothpaste, to increase that exfoliation effect. But thank you to the Microbead Free Water Act of 2015, this banned microbeads being used in any cosmetic products starting in 2017. So this is really great. This means that we can't, unknowingly go buy toothpaste that accidentally has, microplastics in it that we could be ingesting, that could be going into our environment. However, this act did not mention anything about the use of microplastic beads for industrial use or for laundry detergent. So there are a handful of laundry detergents that still have microbeads in them. And the reason for that is because they think it will create a deeper clean in the washing machine. So it's actually quite challenging to find if your detergents have microbeads in them. They often don't put the ingredients on the label, so you have to go to their website, take that extra step to see if your laundry detergent does have microplastics in it. But this is a huge challenge, because if you think about our sewage water, all of this water from our laundry machines goes to the wastewater treatment plants, but the treatment plants don't have filtration that's able to catch these beads before it re-enters our waterways. So we want to be really cognizant as consumers that our laundry detergent doesn't have these microbeads in them. Another form of primary microplastics are these nurdles. So nurdles are the virgin plastic. You can think of them as the pre-production plastic pellets. They are sent all over the world to manufacturing plants to be melted and shaped into the plastic products that we use today. Often they are quite small, so oftentimes they escape in transit. And so when I used to live in Miami, I would go to the beach and I would actually find nurdles in the sand on the beach almost every time I went. And the last primary form of microplastics are these microfibers. So we actually create these plastic fibers that can be used in our textiles and our clothing. So this polyester is one example of this. And these microfibers, essentially, you have the plastic, it's like melted and pushed out these tiny little tubes to create these thin fibers that then can be weaved into our clothing. Of course, our fibers don't just stay on our clothes. If we're washing or drying, there is an inevitable amount of shed that happens. So these microfibers can then enter the environment in that way. Secondary microplastics include microfragments. So when they're this small, it's often hard to tell where they came from, but a general definition of a microfragment would be that they're unidentifiable shapes, different colors. They may have like a waxy texture to them, but they're basically, you can tell that they're a degraded form of a larger type of plastic. Microfoam, these are like broken up pieces of styrofoam from potentially packaging or your takeout containers. These can be broken up. They have, a soft texture. If you've ever touched like foam in your packaging, you're quite familiar with what that feels like, but irregularly shaped as well. And then we have microfilms. So this could be thought of as your plastic bag, your saran wrap. It's flimsy, thin pieces of plastic. These get easily broken down because they're already so thin. And you can find these like tiny pieces of microfilm plastic kind of all over the environment in urban areas, as well as in some more natural areas along like beaches and things. So the major sources of microplastic can be outlined in this data bubble. So you can see most of our microplastics are coming from synthetic textiles. So your clothing, that's really something that we all can think about as, you know, consumers of clothing, ensuring that we're purchasing things that are from brands that are sustainable, potentially using recycled materials, recycled water bottles, but also our practices of washing. If we can create filtration in our washer machines or our dryers to prevent these microfibers from entering the wastewater treatment plant and ultimately our waterways, that would be a great way to prevent these microfibers from entering the environment. The next most popular are from car tires. So when car tires erode, that dust can actually spread through the wind or the rain into our environment, into our waterways. Road markings, city dust is 24%. So just the general dust that comes from living in a city. I live right outside New York City, so I'm familiar with this dust. I feel like I come home covered in it sometimes. And then road markings. So the road infrastructure oftentimes uses paint or thermoplastics, epoxy. All of these type of materials can wear away and form microplastics as well. Marine coating in a similar way, but a smaller percent. Personal care products. So while in the US, we don't have microbeads anymore in our products, that's not a global initiative. So this still encompasses some major microplastic sourcing. And then the virgin nurdles or the plastic pellets account for 0.3%. So all the properties that make plastics such a valuable product, so that they are low density, they're moldable, they're pretty inexpensive because they're made out of oil, they're persistent to heat, to water. All of these things also make it very easily transported around the world. So they can be transported throughout the air, the sea, and it can even be found in our ground soil, groundwater. Our studies have also confirmed this fact that these tiny microplastics, due to their small size and low density, have an incredible ability to travel around even some of the most remote places on Earth. So there was a study that looked at the French Pyrenees Mountains, one of the most pristine wilderness areas because it's hard to get to. There's little development there. It's quite far from major cities. So it is quite remote, yet there was a study that found microplastic fragments, fibers, and films in all atmospheric deposition samples that they collected from the field in this area. So that means that the plastic is likely not derived from this area because there's pretty much no one there, but it's coming in atmospherically through wind or rain or snow and being deposited in these areas. The Marianas Trench had found with 5 other deep ocean trenches in the Pacific Rim to have microplastics in the waters and in the sediment. And there was even a study that found that 72% of the plankton sampled in these deep ocean trenches had microplastics in their bellies. So even the tiniest plankton in some of the most remote places on Earth. The Arctic, there were samples taken from ice flows from the Fram Strait in the Arctic area that had microplastic contamination in them. It was, less than some of the samples they took from the Swiss Alps, but it was still shocking to find any contamination on this ice flow. They also found that microplastics are found on the Arctic beaches, the sea ice, the water column, sea floor as well. And then finally, even in Antarctica, There's a study that found that 7 of the 8, it's a small sample size, but 7 of the 8 water samples taken around the peninsula of Antarctica here contained at least one microplastic. Another study confirmed and found that microplastics were in the sea surface waters around Antarctica as well. So with some of this contamination being found in some of the most remote places on Earth, it really begs the question, is there anywhere that plastic doesn't exist? And who is it impacting? Because we know that plastic is found in these different forms all over. We're still doing a lot of research to uncover what the impacts are on our ecosystems and human health. But we have found that some larger pieces of plastic can cause blockages and lacerations of the digestive tract of animals, and it can biomagnify up the food chain. So if a small fish, let's say, eats 2 microplastics, a larger fish eats 2 of those fish. Now that fish has 4 microplastics in its belly. That is called biomagnification. And you can see how it rapidly increases as you go up the food chain. So apex predators may have more microplastic contamination than some of the lower animals, creatures on the food pyramid. So this is a huge challenge. Plastics also often contain these different additives like biocides or flame retardants, plasticizers, lubricants. These chemicals, of course, are not great if they're ingested because they can leach into the host. And plastics also have an uncanny ability to absorb contaminants in the surrounding area. So they can really absorb something called hydrophobic organic contaminants, or HOCs, persistent organic pollutants, POPs, polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, and heavy metals as well. So once these plastics are absorbing these chemicals from the environment, if they're ingested, they could leach these chemicals into the host that ate that plastic, which is a real concern. And so once these plastics are ingested, there's more research that needs to be done, but they're seeing that it can inhibit growth, cause developmental defects, or lower reproductive rates. So as humans, we are actually ingesting about 5 grams of microplastics per week, which is about the weight of your credit card. So you can think about eating that credit card's worth of plastic each week through a variety of different sources. It is found in our drinking water, both filtered water and, well, drinking water from your tap, as well as bottled water. Bottled water is actually worse. There are more microplastics in your bottled water. So that's another reason why you shouldn't be buying bottled water. There's more contamination in there, as well as you're continuing to perpetuate the plastic challenge. Shellfish, especially the fish that are filter feeders, they contain a lot of microplastics. So eating them can put it in your bodies as well. Even things like beer and salt have microplastics in them. There is actually a study that recently came out that farm animals that were in commercial farming, so our cows, our pigs, every single sample of meat from this commercial farming plant had microplastics in it. And there was a kind of social media blast that went out about what they feed these animals. And oftentimes it is just the waste, the expired food from a grocery store. They don't even oftentimes care to take it out of the packaging. They just grind it all up and feed that expired waste from the grocery to their farm animals. So it really is kind of a garbage in, garbage out scenario. We have to be, if we want to eat clean food, we can't be feeding these animals things that are contaminated with microplastics or anything else as well. It's going to come right back to us. In terms of our human health, there has been a study that came out in 2021 that found that microplastic, the true definition, I guess, would be microplastic particles as small as 7 microns were found in 77% of the healthy adult blood donors in the Netherlands. So blood is our transportation pathway for our entire body, for our organs. So these plastics are also potentially being transported and moved around our bodies into other tissues and organs as well. They also found that even human placentas are permeable to nanoplastics that are from the range of 50, 80, 240 nanometers in size. So it could be transferring into the placenta and impacting an unborn child. But there's more research that really needs to be done on this area. So we are going to share some research from Bejan once he arrives. But in the meantime, we'll chat about some solutions, because there are a suite of solutions that need to be implemented from every level. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to stop excessively producing plastic, endorsing plastic production companies, and releasing it into the environment. So, of course, from an individual perspective, that means we can stop using all of this single-use plastic, like grocery bags, water bottles, straws, cutlery, takeout containers. That is something that we can take upon ourselves as personal action and encourage our friends and family and community to do the same. But as with the climate crisis, the plastic crisis also really relies on a collective effort. So if you can drive action outside of just your personal decision-making every day, you'll, of course, have a larger impact. So that's what we really need to be focusing on. And we need to ensure that we're holding the correct parties accountable, which in this case is these large fossil fuel companies. For years, they've been diverting attention away from themselves as the producers and drivers of this plastic problem by placing blame on consumers, by basically allowing some of this media to go out saying, hey, if you don't want, microplastics to impact your environment, yourself, your human health, your families, then you should stop using single-use plastic. And in the meantime, they're just going to keep pumping plastic products that we're forced to use in our grocery stores or elsewhere. So as consumers, of course, it's important to be cognizant of our daily actions, but we also need to make sure that we're holding these fossil fuel companies, they need to be held accountable for the plastic that they're creating. So that means that we really need to stop giving them billions of dollars worth of subsidies and government bailouts. We need to deprioritize and divest from these extractive industries and start thinking about sustainable economies and renewables, helping people, convert if they're in an area where these extractive industries are the driver of their economy, prioritizing training programs for them to be a part of the sustainable transition to ensure that's just as possible. We also need to, it's a little bit more challenging, but we really need to focus on ways to remove plastic from our natural environment. And we can't just think about recycling as the end-all be-all in terms of solutions, because there are a lot of challenges with our linear municipality recycling as it is. But this is also a very exciting area for you all as well as your students, because the technology that can be created from them as people that are recognizing this problem and wanting to drive solutions can be implemented to scale and is something that we need right now. So it can be very empowering. So one interesting way to get plastic out of a kind of more localized area are something called bubble barriers. So these bubble barriers can really essentially push plastic to the surface. And then so this would really work best in marina settings or coastlines. So it pushes them up to the surface where then they could be either filtered out or used in conjunction with another technology that was essentially, it was created by surfers. It floats in a marina and it funnels water in, trapping a lot of plastic in, and it would have to be manually dumped pretty frequently, depending on the plastic content in that area. But used in conjunction with these bubble barriers that are bringing it to the surface could be a nice local solution and something that you could see the impact immediately. I love this particular solution because it was the idea for the ocean cleanup machine was derived from a 17-year-old. His name is Boyan Slat. He's now 22 years old, but his idea was essentially, let's not fight the gyres or the current system of our ocean. Let's use them to our advantage. So we have these giant ocean gyres around our world, and they have a tendency, because of the way that the water is moving, to concentrate a lot of plastic in these gyres. So the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is in the Pacific Gyre, which is this very dense area of plastic in our oceans. So he is thinking, let's use these currents to our advantage. If we can stabilize essentially like a filtration net in the ocean, in this gyre, let the currents move the water and the plastic right into these nets so they can be trapped. The next iteration of this technology is that he has this like floating barge where the plastic gets dumped on top. So it's collected. It would have to be disposed of pretty regularly, given how much plastic is in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. But he also was able to use a technology that reduces bycatch. So he's not going to be accidentally catching marine mammals or migratory species within this, this netting, essentially. So if you want to learn more on this, I'm going to be sharing these slides at the end, and I hyperlinked his TED Talk, but his website has even more information. It's called Ocean Cleanup. This is another extremely inspiring example of technology that can be used. It was, I believe he was a 16-year-old high school student that entered a science fair in Ireland, and he wanted to create technology that would be able to remove microplastics from water. And he did that by, it was so simple. There's a video that is also hyperlinked that you can watch, but for the sake of time, maybe we'll wait till the end. But he had microplastics in this water, this jar of water. He just added oil and magnetite to the oil, helped adhere the magnetite to the microplastics in the water. And then he just put a magnet in the water, stirred it around, and was able to collect all the microplastics out of the water. So again, this wouldn't be able to be used in the natural environment, but who's to say this couldn't be used in, let's say, a wastewater treatment plant? So some of these technologies, the step one is finding the technology, creating it, and then step two is thinking about how it can be implemented. And finally, this is a really fun and cool local solution to myself in New Jersey. So TerraCycle focuses on the fact that anything can be recycled, regardless of what your municipal recycling says. Because if you think about it, every county has different recycling rules. It doesn't really make sense why some take some things and not others, until you really dig in and it all comes down to the financials. But TerraCycle is essentially saying anything can be recycled, including cigarette butts, dirty diapers, latex gloves, toothpaste tubes, these things that you could never imagine being recycled before. They have the technology to do it. And their motto is that there's really no such thing as waste. The challenge is the incentive and the finances around it. So this is a great solution, given that our municipal recycling only recycles about 9% of plastic. So there's a huge challenge with that. And I think some of the technology that they used could be a solution. And finally, it is just so critical to educate your students, your friends, and your family to reduce their own consumption of single-use plastic. So their, individual action cause ripples of change. So if you think about, if you're passionate, if you're motivated and focused on this solution, then you can inspire your whole community, and then your impact will be larger than just yourself. And so we created these like cute little take-home cards that we started giving out to people at outreach events. If you would like, you could always, you could either email me and I can send you one of these to give to your students, or you could take it directly from the slides once I share them with you. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Bejan is here, so I'm going to hand it over to him. Hold on one moment. Hi, Bejan.
Hi, Lori.
How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Good.
I listened to part of your talk. It's very nice.
Oh, good. Would you like me to share slides, or would you like to share them?
I will share some slides because I make some changes, because when I hear you talk about something which I think probably you already covered that very nicely. So that's why I switch into a little bit to other things. Just let me share the screen if that's okay.
Of course.
Yeah. So you disabled, please allow me to do that.
Okay, sorry, let me. Okay.
Let me try again. Can you see my slides?
Yes, perfect.
Cool, cool. Let me bring that up. How can I include this one? Okay, just move a little bit. All right, so should I take it over, or what's up? Should I start or?
Yep, go ahead, whenever you're ready.
Okay, yes. Okay, thank you very much for Laura for your invitations. And I also thanks everyone who's come to today's meetings as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is some of my own research at the Columbia University. So my name is Beizang Yang, and you can call me Bay, Hudson Bay, and then New York Bay. So so I'm a like Lamont Associate Research Professor here at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. I got my PhD from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and then with a couple of the like postdoc, I came to the Columbia at 2007. My main research was focused on the characterizing exposure to different type of the pollutants, and then link the exposure to the health outcomes. And so let me bring this one up down a little bit. So yeah, so okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is just to introduce the plastic and the microplastics, which Laura has did quite a lot of work. And then I'm talking about distributions of microplastic in New York City waterways. And because of time, I'm not going to talk about too much about absorptions of the pharmaceuticals to plastics, but I will take the time to talk about our current thinking about how we can solve this, like pollution, especially coming out from the laundry wastes. And then we'll talk a little bit about the potential health impacts and my current effort. And then, summary, and also we'll talk about our our network here, like plastic pollution network at the Columbia University. Okay, so I think probably that Laura already showing you those things, and so basically plastic was being invented. The first plastic was bakelite. It was invented in 1907 by Beckland, and who actually later became a Columbia researchers. And that's the first synthesis materials being made by human beings. And so also that there was other plastics like polystyrene, polyester, and PVC, polyethylene, nylon in the first 50 years in the last century, and then all this starting to emerged. And as Laura mentioned, they have a very different molecular structures, because they're different molecular structures. So they have a different physical chemicals, characteristics, which makes them very diverse, versatile, and as Laura mentioned, they are made by the like a crude oil, so they are relatively inexpensive, and because they are so versatile, inexpensive, and also very durable in certain ways, so they are became the one of the best choice for the materials. And so the research shows that like all those plastics became breaking down, and but also at a very slow rate. So I'm going to show you next slides. Just a minute. So globally, I don't know whether Laura already covered these things. Globally, the primary production since 1950 was we have about 8.3 billion metric tons of the plastic being produced. In that, about 1/3 of was actually still in use. And we have about 2/3 we discard to the environments, including landfills and also to the oceans. And pathetically, we only have about less than 10% to get recycled. This is a really missing part. And so, and all these pollutants get this, like plastic, when they are getting into environments, they are starting to breaking down and also moving to from the landfills, getting into the soils, getting into the, carried by the runoff, getting into the rivers, and can sometimes goes to the oceans as well. So let me see. So I think that Laura already explained to you what are those microplastics and also major source. I'm not going to cover too much on that. So as I mentioned, the plastic getting into the river and being carried by the river and goes into the oceans. And then, ocean has its own current called gyres. And this gyres makes like a circular, like a current. So then plastic, when they are getting into there, they have they are always being carried. So there was being carried inside of the gyres and will not be able to come out. But sometimes when there can be breaking down by the photo like degradations, and but also they are some of them phytoplanktons can like algae also can grow on top of the plastics bottles itself, and then they are like because of they are growing this biomass, a lot of the fall being putting onto the surface, then the like density was changing. And then after certain times, this plastic, because of the growing on the biofilm on the surface, they become denser than the water. They can eventually come down and then goes to the ocean bed. Okay, so we have this like 5 plastic gyres, and one of the most like important one is this is North Pacific like plastic gyres, and constrains thousands of the metric tons of the plastic in there. So impact also, I think the Laura already probably talked about that. The mainly for these larger like animals, the issues is the entanglement and entanglements. And when there was the entangled and also ingestions, then they block the intestines. So then the bird or any animals, other animals, when they are eat that, we can block the intestines, so they're starving to death. So that's a huge issue for ecological. And so there was also other study used the exposure. They're exposed to the mussels and also the phytoplanktons and the carp, and they are using the inflammation biomarkers, and looks like they have the cause the inflammations, can reduce clearance rate, can reduce valve opening and filtering activities, and also the promoting the oxidative stress, because the reactive oxygen species was being promoted, being increased after exposure, and also many others affecting the behavior and fat metabolisms. So that's kind of ecological problems that we are facing, and as I mentioned by Laura, this plastic pollutions everywhere on the Earth's surface. So Lamont Doherty was starting to this research actually through this high school program, which is Lamont Secondary School Field Research Program. Bob Newton was a PI at the time. And we have Deborah, who is actually one of the high school teachers. And about 6 years ago, she very, getting into this, reading a lot of the papers and find out that there was a lot of microplastics in the seafood. So then she started the, a research team that could purchase the grocery, seafood from grocery store. And then took out the, tissues and also in testing, and then use that, digested and then measure what actually microplastics on those, on those seafood. And turns out in every one of them, including shrimps, fish, clams, there are, plastic there. So the issues is that, she actually also used that, not only using NIRAD to identify the plastics, but also use that the FTIR and also find out what kind of the plastic is there. For example, this one was actually PET, and so we can clearly demonstrating that existence of this microplastics in the seafood. And you can see that here was also the majority of those actually of these microplastics are actually fibers, as Laura mentioned. In the microfibers was part of the source was coming out from the laundry, from your textiles. And we're going to discuss in more detail in later slides. So we started to doing the research, collaborating with Riverkeeper, because the Riverkeeper at the time they're looking for new researchers, and when we talked with them, they're very happy to helping us, give us the boat time. John, who is actually the boat captain, help us to cruise the New York City waters, including the Hudson River, and this is Newtown Creek. We're also collecting in this Harlem River and also Flushing Bay. Didn't show up here, so we collected water samples and then we extract it using the filter, and then you can see with quite a lot of those we can see some of the microbeads coming out from in the water. And we also see other particles, for example, black carbon, etc., which is normal. And we'll also see some of the plastic, which is even smaller than these microbeads. You can clearly see this is fluorescent. And using the NIRAD, you can see this is actually, they are actually the microplastics. Okay. So we've looking into this one. We're also doing some of the desorption and absorption experiments. Deployed these in situ experiments in several sites in New York City waterways, including the Pier 25 and also Newtown Creek. In those studies, I didn't show the results here. We did see the pharmaceuticals was attached to the surface of the plastic pellets, and clearly, this is two major source. I mean, you can think about the wastewater treatment plants. They are in all the New York City wastewater treatment plants, they don't have capacity to remove either microplastics and the pharmaceuticals, but this is the best place for them to meet, and they are discharged to the receiving waters. So that's why we are really interested to see what's the contribution coming out from the wastewater in terms of the microplastic loadings in the New York City waters. Okay. So we are, kind of think about how we can solve these issues. Laura has shown you this, different versions of these plots here, and you can see there are microplastics, microfibers, which coming out from the laundry was about 1/3. This is the marine for the marine, into the marine systems, and so. But this is actually including all the open waters and also coastal areas. However, in urban situations, this laundries one was much more high concentrations. In my study, as I showed you previously, the micro fibers takes about 80% in New York City waters. So they are, and also the textile was one of the major source, and so they are basically has two potential way to come into from the laundry. One is from dryers, one is from the washers. In the dryers, because of the hot temperature and also because of vibrations or rolling of this of your fibers of clothes, then small particle fibers breaking down, and then those small fibers when the breaking down, you also most of the dryers have this screen. How the screen, you can see that over time they're accumulating the fibers was growing on top on the screen. However, those screen was not efficient enough to remove the microplastics because the microplastics goes to the micro level, and the screen was kind of like a 3 order of magnitude in terms of the size of the the whole. So that's why they are really not efficient to remove the microplastic from the. Maybe they are good for the long fibers, but it was not good for the small, tiny microplastic. So that's one way. And when they are emitted to the air, and then they are coming, eventually they are because they are, eventually because their density that eventually comes down and being deposited either by wet deposition or dry deposition, and then goes into either goes to the river or goes deposited onto the soils. And after the storm events, then surface runoff can carry them back into the rivers and goes oceans, which is we are trying to explain here. And the second way is actually from the washers. From the washers itself, because you have the detergent and also have the like a bracing from during the washer, and so a lot of fibers breaking down from your clothes, and those they are done. The washer typically they don't have those kind of very fine filters, so they are released directly into the sink, and then sink will connect to the wastewater treatment plants. And the wastewater treatment plants, especially in the New York cities, they are not really designed to remove these particles, and of course they are not designed even to remove the nutrients, because they are the major of these. Most of the wastewater treatment plants in the New York cities are secondary, and so they are mainly remove the carbon, and the nutrients didn't have a very efficient way to remove it, and also they definitely have no way to remove the particles from the plastics. So they are basically from some other study shows that not from us, but some other study shows that they are about like 20%, 10 to 20% was coming out from effluent. And this effluent was being, after the treatment, they are being discharged to receiving water. For example, East River, Newtown Creek, wastewater treatment that they are, deliver their waste, treat the wastewater to the East Rivers. And also a lot of it goes to the wastewater treatment plants actually released to the Flushing Bay. So that's why we see quite a lot of, that's why I can show you this one again. Just a minute. Why we see a high level of in those places this is close to 125th Street of this North River wastewater treatment plants, and this is very close to the Newtown Creek wastewater treatment plants. So they are basically, it doesn't have a capacity to remove them. And another way is actually about 80% to 90% they are got into the sludge because they are can deposit, being the biofilm growing on top of it, and then because the density they are being deposited as a sludge. And the sludge was under dry the water, dry it, and then use a digester to remove the other nutrients. However, they are not really, and also remove the carbon, but they are not good for removing plastics. So the sludge after sludge comes out from wastewater treatment plants, they have several destinies. One is goes to be incineration, goes basically, another thing is burning for the, they are moved to some of the waste sludge goes to the other state and then burn there. And also sometimes they are also being used for as fertilizers to the farms. And then that sludge goes to the fertilizer. As a fertilizers, we go back to the earth surface, and then under the storm events, those plastic can carried by the runoff, and then get it back into the water again. So we do have this kind of the cycle back. So whatever you wear on yourself was going back into the environments in one way or another. Okay. So I did some more work on the, try to figure out what is actually, whether we have we know there was microplastic, but we want to see whether there were nanoplastics, which is less than 1 microns in the laundry wastewater. So I use my home, like washers, and then I collect onto the wastewater onto the filter itself. And you can see there was a lot of these fibers, which is long chained fibers coming out from the wastewater. And so we also doing, try to find out what's actually those particles, not the fiber, but only particles. We see some of the larger particles, but we also can see that this is SEM, scanning electron microscope image. And you can see there was some of the small particles there. This is actually in the nano, size. So in order to characterizing whether this is really true, so we're actually using Raman techniques that we Columbia Chemistry Department has, and we find out this is polyester directed back into the fibers that are coming out from my clothes. And we have about 50% of the cotton, 50% of the polyester. When I do the experiments, I try to balance the number. We'll see. So we're also characterizing these small tiny particles using the Raman techniques, which is only one of these techniques in the world right now. We can actually see the particles down to like 0.5 microns. And you can clearly see there was thousands of these nanoplastics in the wastewater coming out from laundry. And this number is, odd number to the microplastics, which means they're much more of them in terms of numbers for the nanoplastic coming out from the wastewaters from laundries. So that's our recent work. And my colleague Joachim goes, and he's actually doing some of the also use washer and dryers to find out what's the textile, like mass loss, for each, dryers process or washing process. And in the dryers, you can see that was actually the number was the mass loss for the fibers was pretty high, like is more than some of them even more than 1%, and is clearly showing that this like shed of fibers coming out from the dryers. And also he also investigated what is actually coming out from the washers in terms of mass loss, and you can see probably 0.3% was coming out from the washers, which is consistent with my study showing that there were quite a lot of fibers come out. And then his research also shows that if you have detergent, even you have a higher mass loss. The part of the reason is because detergent contains plastic itself, and these microplastics are rubbing and also rubbing your clothes, and then potentially cause the breaking up of the fibers in the clothes as well. So, but the questions to us, we are not only doing the research, we want to see how we can solve the issues, right? So as Laura has mentioned, there was a couple of these other, solutions, but one of my solutions, we think about whether we can really collect those fibers, before they are released into the environments, right? So what's the most efficient way to, preventing pollutions is you mitigation or reduce the pollution right at the sources. That's why we try to working with my students actually right now is try to find out what we can do to remove this, to preventing them getting into the solution. So we developed this advanced techniques, which is called tangential flow techniques, that using these filters, you can basically remove the particles, up to up to the 0.2 microns, which is 200 nanometers. Any particles above 200 nanometers will be retained in the filter by itself. And this is actually showing that the water quality changes. And so this is the filtered water after these filtrations, and you can see they are pretty clear. This is whatever remain below behind the filter. You can see how dirty it is. So which is clearly, if you're using that, like these filtration techniques, you can efficiently remove most of the particles from that filters. So recently we put into a NOAA proposal, try to solve the problem to see how we can reuse, developing a system that can plug this leakage into the aquatic systems. And so which we design is actually we also using, I just showing you, we use these filtrations. And these filtrations, because this filtration is very efficient to remove the particles, like the particles with clean water what comes out, but the particles will retain inside of these filtration systems. And eventually we backwash the filtrations. And so the pollutants were coming down into the sludge. And then we actually, we're going to collect the sludge, dry it, and then we bring to the North Carolina State University. In there, they have this textile college, and then they can develop method to depolarize this like a polyester, so that they can break it down into the polymers become small monomers, so that they can be reused for the fashion. So we try to recycle this, basically is to really try to get zero, we call it circulated, usage. So we try to reuse of all the plastic pollutions, and so preventing them getting into the environments. Okay, so this is, of course, this is one of the research design. So I don't know, Laura, is actually going to have interactions with the audience, or is I can go continue and then come back if they have question?
Yeah, I think you should continue on. Everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom, and we can kind of gather them at the end. But so far, no questions. So I'd say keep going.
Okay, so do I do a good time? Do I have is that I'm good at the time?
Yeah, I think like even up to 4:45 if you need.
Well, let me see. I think I can probably cover it in next 10 minutes if you.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So recently, as I mentioned to you, I do a lot of work with the medical school here, Columbia Medical School, and also Mayo Medical School Public Health. What I'm doing in research is try to linking the exposure to the health outcomes. And so one of the questions is, we have the microplastics. We also through our research, at least from the laundry waste, which is the first time in the world, we can really identify do have a lot of these nanoplastics. What is that potential health outcome that? What is actually important concept is size matters. The reason the size matters because if you have a smaller size, easier to get into the body, and can cross the epithelial cells, can get into the body and carried by the blood, and then transport to the different organs, and it can deposit it there. And because of human beings is pretty good to remain the particles behind the kidney, so that's why particles you got in has a difficult way to come out. So you basically yourself is accumulations. For the ages, the particles accumulating in the body was growing, keep growing. So that's why and also what there comes out is come out from the blood, getting the organs, they stay in the organs, potentially goes to get some organelles into the cells and stay there forever. So which is I'm saying that why this size matters, because if you have a much more smaller nano size, smaller the size, the higher bioavailability. So that's why we really want to see what is actually there. So some of the other research, as Laura mentioned, in the blood, they can see there was very high concentrations of the plastics from different type of plastic, including the polyethylene and also PET, polypropylene, and the PAMA in the blood samples. And they use GC-MS as a new technology, a technology that find out like in the blood. And so another study using the micro FTIR, the Fourier transform infrared images, and they identify the larger particles, microparticles, in the like lung tissues, which is the first defenders for the human bodies, right? If you have inhalations, you're first getting into the lung, and then the lung, if it's smaller enough, you can cross the the, like cells and then getting into the blood and then carried. So, and their research shows that was, identify the particles. They can be large enough, goes to like even even 100 microns, which is reasonable. But remember, most of the particle getting into the lung, deep into the lung, was about PM 2.5, which means it's 2.5 microns. Larger particles typically being stopped by the, being intercepted to the windpipe, so we've been retained in the respiratory system rather than going into the lung. So, but clearly this is smoking gun, showing that large particle getting into the lung and then potentially stay there. As Laura mentioned, when the microplastic get into the lung, they can go into the the first organ that goes to is left heart. So the left heart, they pumped into the different organs and different place. For example, they get into the brain directly, and also get into the head, and also goes to the spleen, go to liver, go to kidney, go to lung, go to belly, whatever. All the place comes when they are passing from the lung itself. It's very different from the GI system, because in the GI systems, you first will go passing if you have from the GI, like intestines, that first comes into the liver. So then in the liver, sometimes you can kind of stop some of the pollutants, and then in the liver can be carried. And but the particles, they also can get back into the lung and then get into the heart, and then go back to these other organs again. So the a PM, particulate matter, after inhalations can cause. This is kind of research already showing they are PM 2.5 was associated with the mortality and the morbidity. They can cause oxidative stress, inflammation in the systematic way, and then cause basically death of the people. And if you look into the epidemiological data, the higher the PM 2.5, the higher mortality rates for the elders. So clearly have this, bad, adverse health outcomes. And even some of the other disease like asthma hospital visit, and also cardiovascular hospital visit was actually higher during the PM 2.5, events, and which clearly showing that the plastics, which is potentially, it was also kind of the particular matters, can also cause the health outcomes. So we're really worried about those things. So that's why we're starting to do research. And I'm collaborating with the Rutgers, my Phoebe Steppen in the Rutgers medical school, and she's actually used that rat as animal model, and in there she's exposed these polystyrene beads to the actually doing this kind of called perfusion experiments, and basically this is actually the placenta. So she's, take out the placenta from rat, and then, she's basically introduce the blood and also the polystyrene beads into the blood. And then she also takes sample from the fetus side, blood sample from fetus side, and then see how much was crossed placenta. And you can see that when this is, they are putting in the plastics, beads into the blood, you can see there was from the mother side was a decrease. However, in the a fetal side, you can see there was an increase over the time and stay at relatively high levels. So clearly there was this nanoplastics can cross the placenta getting into the fetus side. And as you know, fetus doesn't have anything to preventing them getting into the organs, because that's you basically the growing with the existence, like you growing your brain, you growing your heart, everything you growing of them with the existence of the nanoplastics. So there was more like a health studies was on that. So currently we are collaborating with them and try to get the support from the NIEHS, which is the National Institute of Environmental Health Institute. And we try to get some of the support from them to do some more of the researches. Another potential way to get into the cause adverse effects is getting into the brain. So for example, you probably know that in the most blood, larger, between the blood and the brain, there was called this blood-brain barrier, because the brain is a very most important organs. So the human beings the body want to clean blood getting into the brain. So that's why they are forming this barrier. This barrier has these tiny junctions of the epithelial cells, so that the particles can be, has to be passing through this barrier before they are getting into the brain cells, like neurons and astrocytes. And so that there can be active, or passive, transport between the blood to the getting the brain side. And so, but because of plastic is different type of plastic, they have a different type of the, kinetics across this barrier. Because some of the, like polyethylene, some of them was just like proteins. If they are molecular structure like proteins, so then the body was thinking that's a useful, particles. So they became either actively open the hole so they can get in. So we are right now is try to talk to collaborating with researchers at the medical school, and to study using the 3D model to find out whether they are, what kind of the particles can cross this barrier, how quickly get into there, if they're getting into there, how bad they are caused, like a damage. And so we recently write the proposal to CAC's foundations and then try to get their support to do this research. One thing I'm just trying to show you that this is a plastic production with years. And you can see there was this kind of the, fast, like even this is not first order, this is a second order of the increase over the time. But in the United States, the neurodegeneration disorder disease was always higher than the globally, always almost double than, like global levels. But you can still see these neurodegenerations like ALS, Parkinson's, they are actually increased over the past 50 years. So I'm not saying this is a cause issues, but it at least worth to look into that. So that's why we are forming the teams to do the research to really try to figure out whether this actually can cause, if the human beings get exposed, does it actually cause problems? Okay. So one thing research we really want to do is, as I mentioned to you, is you have to identify these nanoplastics. So far, the GCMS method, which is I mentioned, which they are used for the blood, figure out the nanoparticles in the blood, was not really, you cannot figure out what actual particle size and also particle distributions, and what is actually the, like a type of the plastics. So in the blood. So, you can find out the total amount of the plastics in there, but in terms of what's the particle size, what's the, what's the surface characteristics of the particles there, GCMS cannot do the job. And so we are developing this method, which is called the stimulated Raman techniques, that can identifying these particles, plastic particles down to the 20 micrometers, rely on these new technologies. And so far we have been able to, as Laura mentioned, we actually collected the same, we actually did the, some of the brand of the, drinking bottle, like not drinking water, but the bottled water sold by Target and also Walmart's and all sorts of the CVS, etc. So we actually find out there was about 50,000 of nanoparticles in just 1 liter of the water. So clearly those the nanoplastics, which is, as I mentioned to you, that are there. And so, but we are not quite sure what is actually the health outcomes. What is actually, does actually cause the adverse health effects? And so that is still a question mark, a big question mark. And I'm pretty sure no one has the answer for that, which is worth, that's why we want to do the study on that, right? So I'm going to close the, with my acknowledge. I have a close collaborations with my Kim's goals, and also my, my Columbia, the Columbia University Chemistry Department, Dr. Wei Ming, and also many other researchers, and also my students, my lab assistant, and also my funding resources. And before I enter this talk, I'm just mentioning one of things we are doing, which is Laura is also part of that, is actually the forming this called Columbia Plastic Pollution Analysis and Sustainable Solution Working Group. And recently we get this network award from Climate School. So good things of that is that that will helping us to solidify our connections working group, and we can invite outside seminar. Doing a seminar, we invite outside speakers, and also doing basically foster internal research to fight with plastics. The reason I'm saying that is because plastic pollution is huge pollutions, but I'm only a geochemist. I'm doing some of the exposure. I'm far away from the totally completely understanding what's the size and also the breadth and also the intensive and how to solve the plastic pollution issues. So that's why we are forming this working group, and which is I'm a director, and we also have 2 directors. And so we actually accumulate, have professors coming from the environmental law, life cycle analysis and method development, and also environmental impacts, and also some of the professors who are actually doing the bioplastics, which is biodegradable materials, and also experts in recycle and reuse modeling in terms of the air and water, and also who actually can do the economic analysis, and also that the environmental toxicity and health, which is I'm collaborating with quite a lot of the other researchers, and also the education part, which is Laura. You can see that she was a part of this working group, and so that's what I'm going to present. So you're more than welcome to ask questions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Wow, your research, some of the stuff I actually wasn't too familiar with. So it was really interesting for me to learn about some of the work being done on plastic, nano and microplastic impacts, particularly to human health. So we have some questions. So Yanis asks, are there mechanisms in the body? I think they're trying to say to take away these accumulated plastics from the body, to take them out.
Well, this is kind of research we are doing. So I don't have a direct answer to that, because we don't know what's the function of the. Basically, think about it. What if you get in the body, where it goes to? Coming out, basically you can breathing. That was one of the things is breathing, right? And I'm talking about not like in testing, like you can pass. Ingestions, some of the particles, if you're not getting into the body, it can pass out, right? But if it's getting in the body, what is the major source coming out? One is probably you can do the breathing sometimes comes out, but I'm not sure that's actually the dominant way. Another way is from the urine. And from as I mentioned to you, kidney is very good. If they are functioning, they're very good at preventing the particles come out because they want to retain proteins, and also other major larger macromolecules to inside of the body, and so that is actually potentially have a filtration techniques. So we don't know what at what level and how they come out, what kind of type of the particle can come out from that mechanisms. That's a good questions, and we don't really have the answer to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of, in terms of the plastic space, there's a lot of questions that are still actively being researched. So sometimes more questions than answers at the moment. We have another question. What is the biochemical action of these microplastics inside the human body?
So, as Laura mentioned, as you mentioned, there was some of the potentially pollutants being, and also as I mentioned, my study as well, some of the pollutants can coat on the surface because the plastics, because it's molecular structures, they're very good to the absorb the pollutants like a PCB, dioxins, PAH, and also other small tiny particles. So they can potentially carry and those pollutants when they are when the plastic getting into the body, of course they're getting released. And so then that's become a huge other burdens, right? Cause other problems. In terms of plastic itself, we are still doing the study. And because it's so inert here, means the surface was not really reactive for the larger particles, but for the nanoparticles, it's a different story. So because when they are become smaller and smaller, the particles, it's sometimes is not because of the type of particle, it's because the size of particles can cause the health outcomes. So for example, if it's really small, then you can get into the bodies, get in the tissues, get into the, organelles in the cells. And then they are basically, can interrupt the other studies and then cause because sometimes your, your cells, your body was thinking this is outside material. So they are starting to attack it. And when they are starting to attack it, then they cause circulatory, inflammations. So, but as I mentioned, this is still in early stages. So no one would have an answer on that right now, but this is part of the reason we try to do the more work on that. I mean,
Yes.
Laura, you can add the comments on that. This is currently my answer to that.
Yep. Nope. I would completely agree. In particular, like we know the impacts of some of these contaminants that the plastics are absorbing. We know what those impacts are on humans. So if the plastics are absorbing, let's say, like PCBs or heavy metals, if they're releasing that into the human body, then we know the potential impacts of those things. But yeah, in terms of plastics themselves, still lots of work to be done there. I can take this one, but feel free to weigh in as well, Bejan. So Giannis also asked, is shredding plastic or using biodegradable plastic bags a good practice, or does it facilitate the propagation of microplastics down the food chain and in our human bodies? Yes, that is, in terms of thinking about shredding plastic, it doesn't help in terms of getting rid of plastic. You're creating microplastics essentially. And some of the worries I've heard when it comes to biodegradable plastics is that if there is still the synthetic component to them, then you're just speeding up the process of this plastic to break up into tinier pieces of plastic. So it kind of has a misleading name. So if you're using some of these like biodegradable plastics, not all of them are really doing what they say. They're actually making the microplastic problem worse. Did you want to weigh in with anything on that?
I think you answered the question very nicely. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And then in terms of research projects, the project that Bejan had mentioned, it's called the Secondary School Field Research Program, or SSFRP. It's run out of Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory that's up in Rockland County, and they offer research projects for high school students that are mentored by undergraduate students that are supported by high school teachers, and then all working with a Lamont scientist. So you can see there's this nice tiered mentorship structure. And one of the projects that students do work on is looking at microplastics. Last summer, they looked at microplastics along the beaches of Manhattan and the other boroughs in the New York City area. And so this is something that students can apply to. I think applications are going to go out this spring for the summer. So you can go onto the lamont.columbia.edu website to learn more about SSFRP and how to get involved with that as well. And yeah, we don't have any more questions. I do want to just share for the last 7 or so minutes, we do have a curriculum that we started to develop around microplastics. It's a 7-part lesson that is really targeted for grades 3 through 8, but you can cater the lessons how you wish. If you would like to scale it up for some older students, you could certainly do something like that as well. So I'm going to share my entire screen here. So this curriculum, it really cross-cuts the subjects of marine biology, environmental science, ecology. We have learning objectives outlined here, and it's matched to the next generation science learning standards that is closely aligned to the New York State science learning standards if you're in New York. There's a nice background information if you'd like to review any of the information that Bejan and I shared today. And then it goes additional resources as well. and of course, the lesson outline. So it tells you materials needed, goals, and then how to run each of the activities. So I just wanted to share potentially a handful of them. We can't go through each of the 7 lessons today, but I will be sharing this curriculum with everyone who participated, who registered, and it will be in time, potentially after the holidays, up on our website for anyone to use, open sourced. So you can see, we'll also give you access to the PowerPoints if you'd like to use them directly in your classroom as well. So for a younger audience, we found this is, for the sake of time, because it is about like 5 minutes long, we're not going to watch this video, but it is a nice video that explains microplastics to a younger audience. So this could be a nice primer for you if you wanted to launch this curriculum in your classroom. Then this is a nice way for your students to think about models. So the first thing in terms of introducing microplastics is really having students define the differences between macro and micro. What defines microplastic? What are the different types of microplastic in terms of primary, secondary, microbeads, fibers, etc. So after providing them that background on microplastics, students will use this tiny ruler on this worksheet to create a microplastic, going by the definition that it's anything less than 5 millimeters to about 1 micron. Of course, they're not going to be able to draw something that small, but just to show the different types. So they could be drawing on here microbeads, microfibers, foam, film, and then to think about, okay, so we have these different microplastics. They're all different shapes, sizes, colors. What are the inputs for each of them? So thinking about this as, an input, the product, and then the output type of model. So they can think about, if they're talking about fibers, it would be textiles, plastic bags for polyethylene, et cetera, et cetera. Then thinking about the output. So who is being impacted by these microplastics? And they might not get to humans right off the bat. They might think about marine animals first, which is completely fine. But I think in the discussion that you have with your students, you can lead them to realize that this problem is not, it's not an environmental problem. It cross-cuts every area of our lives. It cross-cuts every sector, which to Bejan's point, our working group that we have, you could see all of our collaborators are from all these different areas of research, all these areas of work, economy, like health, law. I mean, you could think about this as a challenge very similar to climate, in that climate is impacting all areas of our life. And so when we create solutions, we have to also think transdisciplinary as well. So this is just a nice way to get your students to start thinking about microplastics and the definition of them. Then lesson 2 would be about microplastic impacts on the marine ecosystem. So one of the examples would just be thinking about first, what does a standard marine pyramid look like? So this is an example pulled from Nat Geo, but in your classroom, you could even have your students come up to the board and kind of, or even sketch on their own papers, what their marine ecosystem looks like. It might not be oceanic, it might be estuarine, it might be a lake, but to have them kind of think about the different trophic levels first and who eats who. So that's a good starting point. I'm going to play this so you can see the animation. This ecosystem starts with, the primary producers at the bottom, including phytoplankton, and goes up from there. But what if you can ask your students, what does microplastic look like? What could be confused for microplastics? So in this example, it could be really confused as plankton, and it is in the natural world. A lot of different animals, even zooplankton, are confusing microplastics as phytoplankton. So if we replaced microplastics in this food web, what would be the impacts? So let's say, and you could do this with your students to have them kind of be involved in the very little bit of math that's here, but let's say a zooplankton eats 2 microplastics. Blue tang eats two things too, one being microplastics and the conch eats one microplastic. Going up the food chain, the third level of this trophic pyramid would have to eat more because they're a larger animal. So maybe they're eating 2 zooplankton, which have microplastics in them. So now this barjack has 4 microplastics from the zooplankton and 1 from the queen conch. And you can kind of go through and see how it goes up the food chain. And this is all called biomagnification. So it's a really great, very visual, hands-on way for students to understand biomagnification as a term and how it relates to microplastics. It also relates to, other contaminants in the waters as well, which is why in terms of like our human impact, we advise against eating higher up on the food chain. So that is just a few of the activities. I'm also in this curriculum outlining some simple research methods that you could employ with your students that doesn't require now red staining or Raman spectroscopy, given that those are very high level and inaccessible, but it does allow students to develop their own research project, create a hypothesis, analyze their data, and come to some conclusions, doing a field project in their own community, which is pretty powerful when you think about the ability to better understand your community, to then lead to solutions. The last thing I just want to say, whenever you're doing, given that this is such a huge problem and it's impacting so many different areas of our life, ending on solutions with your students is critical. So I encourage, if you do use any of this curriculum, to go through some of the solutions that Bejan and myself had shared, particularly some of the technology that young people have developed, that you don't have to be, like a PhD or a postdoc to develop these solutions. If you see a challenge, you can be creative and develop a solution. And sometimes that's all it takes. It takes looking at a challenge and thinking creatively about it. And then the implementation creates a community and network to really deploy that solution to really help the world. So the last kind of activity is having students kind of think through solutions that could help the challenge and encouraging creativity when it comes to that last activity. So we're 2 minutes over, I apologize, but I also want to share that we're going to be sharing all of these resources with you via email. And as I said, it's going to be on our website. I also encourage everyone, if you haven't already, we have a recording of the panel discussion on the film Microplastic Madness that was held on November 1st. It's on our YouTube, our Climate School YouTube, but I'll share that link with everyone as well, because I think hearing about the solutions, particularly from a student activism lens, is incredibly optimistic and powerful. All right. Oh, I have one. Oh, no, we answered that question already. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much. I hope you have a great night. And thank you, Bejan, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.